Hi, just want to show you a quick video. Today we're going to be looking at observational learning. I posted this video on our Facebook, but I think this might be a really good way to start our little info here. So just check this video clip out for a sec.
Looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Would you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so. Did you see it back there, George? Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English. Go back where you came from. That's the same thing to me. What's wrong with you, Harry? What's wrong with you?
Get over here! You don't want to speak! I've had enough of you! I've had enough of you!
Pretty powerful stuff, huh? Well, that's our topic for today, basically. The ideas that ad was talking about is observational learning. So we're going to learn about why perhaps the people who made that ad decided to use that as their platform for child-friendly behaviour. Okay? Observational learning. What is it? Basically, in a nutshell, it's watching and listening as someone else does something. We use observation of another person's actions and their consequences to guide our future actions. That's my wife doing some vacuuming. You could probably think of lots of examples. There are some there on the screen as well as the ones that we just saw. One of the very dangerous things that that people aren't aware of is how much children observe what their parents and their big brothers and big sisters do and how much information they try and learn from that. So we're going to learn about what it takes to learn through using observational learning. There's some key elements of observational learning. They make up the acronym ARMR, A-R-R-M-R. So you can think of the ARMR response in terms of observational learning, and the A in ARMR stands for attention. In order to learn through observation, you have to be paying attention to the model's behavior. Now, when we talk about the model, that is the person that we are watching. Okay. So here, when we talk about classical conditioning, how you're a passive learner, it just happens whether you need to know it or not. When we are looking at observational learning, this is really, really active. You have to be not just watching the person, but really paying attention to what they're doing. That's really important. Okay, so you're active when you're doing observational learning. And there are a number of things that can affect how well you observe a model, and that can be your ability to, perceptual ability, so your vision, that kind of stuff. Motivation is a big one. How much you really want to watch what they're doing. Also, the situation in which the behavior is being observed, and if there are any distractions. Some important information. When we are looking at our model, we are more likely to pay attention to what they're doing if that model is liked, that model is famous or has high status, like a boss. If it's similar to you, so if it's the same age, the same gender, that kind of stuff. If they are familiar to us, like our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our aunties, our uncles. Also, if the behavior is quite visible and easy to see, and also if it demonstrates a behavior that we can imitate, and we think we can imitate. Okay? The next stage, the first R in ARMS, A-R-R-M-S, is retention. Okay? So we need to be able to remember the model's behavior. More importantly, is that we need to make a mental representation. You need to be able to picture what the model did. Okay, so if we're thinking of you're watching your mum make a cake, okay, you need to be able to picture how many eggs she put in, when she put them in, how she beat the flour and the milk, or whatever it is that she put in the cake. Okay, you need to be able to mentally see that. So it's not just watching. It's when we're talking about retention, we're talking about a mental representation, and it says it there. Okay, so often we link a visual image with a verbal description of the model's actions. So that's really important. The second R in armor is reproduction. So if you are trying to learn something, you attempt to imitate what has been observed. What's really important is that second dot point there. We need to have the ability. Okay, so I love surfing, okay, and one of the things I love is watching people surf. So if I watch Kelly Slater, a pro surfer, if I was watching him, I could watch him, I could pay attention to what he was doing, I could get a mental image of what he was doing, but I might not be strong enough or fit enough. Another good example is playing footy. Okay, you might love football, you might watch football, you might really watch someone who's a really good kicker of the football, who's playing AFL, but realistically you don't have the leg muscles or the ability to do that physically. This also applies to mental ability. So for example, sometimes small kids won't have they won't understand why or how to do something that they've seen an older person do. Okay? And as you can see there, a naturally uncoordinated person is unlikely to be able to imitate Matthew Lloyd's goal kicking. This is about out of date. You probably think of someone like Buddy Franklin, someone like that. Okay. Lastly, the M and the R in armor is motivation and reinforcement. You're not going to learn anything using observational learning if you don't care to learn it. Okay? So you can watch 1,000 people make origami paper cranes, but if you don't have any desire to make one, you're not going to learn how to do it by watching them. Okay? But perhaps if there's something that you really want to do, like if you want to watch someone who's really, really good at cooking, or if they're really, really good at a sport that you want to play, then you might watch how they do that. Or they're really, really good at doing well on their tests, you might watch to see what it is they do during class, and then you can try and do that. But you're going to have to want. That's the motivation. Okay. The other thing too is reinforcement. So this is the operant conditioning side of things in terms of observational learning. So if you're watching the model and they do something and they get positively reinforced for it, okay, then you're going to want to do that as well. If you try something and you get reinforced for doing it, then you will want to do it as well. You will want to learn that. Okay? So for example, the example down the bottom is you want to be a crew trainer at McDonald's so you can get a pay raise. So you imitate their behavior. Okay? You do the things they do. You learn to talk to customers how they learn. You learn to talk to other workers the way that they do. And then hopefully that will get you your pay raise. Okay. And there you can see there are two different types of reinforcement. There's what we call vicarious reinforcement, and that is where you see the model being reinforced. Okay? So vicariously. It doesn't happen to you, but it happens to someone else, but you can channel that, you can feel that. Okay? So it might be watching an older sister getting rewarded for studying hard and getting into uni. Because you've seen that, you think, well, because she studied hard and she got into uni, that was her reward, I want the same rewards. Also, sometimes you might be reinforced in the stages of you trying to learn the behavior. So you trying to be like your older sister or older brother who did really well, just going and studying means that you get a really good test score, so you keep doing that behavior. Okay? So that's what we're talking about there. So they're the two different types of reinforcement. As said earlier, observational learning can also be known as modeling, because the person that we are looking at is called the model. Right? This is really important when we're going to talk in a second about the research where we learnt most of this information. Observational learning can be useful for more complex behaviours and can be more efficient than trial and error learning. So this is kind of the learn from someone else's mistakes kind of idea. Okay? You don't have to make all the trials and errors yourself. If you watch someone else do the desired behaviour, you can learn from them. Okay? So, Albert Bandura, this is the man, this is the person who created the famous experiment. Okay? The Bobo doll. Think about Bandura and Bobo doll. They both start with B. Okay? His theory was that we learn many behaviours simply by watching behaviour and its consequence being experienced by someone else. Alright? That is our model. Okay? It's not totally separate from conditioning, but conditioning can occur vicariously, indirectly through observation. Alright? So there's still the elements of learning like classical conditioning or operant conditioning, but they're not happening directly to you. You do them by observing. Okay? Albert Bandura talked about vicarious conditioning, vicarious reinforcement, and vicarious punishment. All of these things are the same that you know from operant conditioning and classical conditioning, but the word vicarious means it's happening to somebody else. That is his Bobo doll. He did 5 experiments, but we're going to look at 3 main experiments. His 3 main experiments involved the use of this doll. It's weighted at the bottom. You can see, I'll circle that for you. There's a weight in the bottom, and so if you hit it in the face, it bounces down and comes back up. So it always stands up straight by itself. Okay? This was really important to his experiment. So he had a whole bunch of kids and a whole bunch of adults. Okay? What he did was he used the adults as models, and they would play with the Bobo doll, and then the kids would watch that play, and then the adults would leave the room, and then the kids were allowed to play freely in another room with the same kind of toys. Some of the toys were deemed to be aggressive toys, like hammers and swords and guns, and other toys were deemed to be not aggressive toys. So toys like, you know, cars and blocks and that kind of stuff, Play-Doh. So some of the models were aggressive, some were calm, some ignored the doll altogether. This is across all 3 studies pretty much. As I said, children were given the opportunity to play in a room with the same doll in the room, and any aggressive acts were recorded. As I said before, Bandura had 3 studies. You're going to need to know all 3. Okay? So, his first study in 1961, he thought that, or the question was, will children who are passive observers to aggressive acts by an adult attempt to imitate this act when given the opportunity to do so? Basically, if kids watch someone be aggressive towards a doll or play aggressively, when they go into the same room, will they play aggressively? That was the idea. He thought that children would imitate the acts of the model. He also thought that children were more likely to imitate the model of the behaviour of the model of the same sex, and boys would be more aggressive than girls. You can see there the specifics of his study. Okay, and he had 3 conditions, or 3 different independent variables. He had 1 control variable, and that's so there was no one in the room. So no one went in and played with the doll. Kids were just kind of led into the room. That was the control condition. Then he had 2 experimental conditions. 1, the adult went into the room and played aggressively with the doll and other toys. Okay, hit it and pushed it over and all that kind of stuff. The other one, the model went into the room and played calmly with the toy. So patted it, hugged it, talked to it, had a little cup of tea with it, those kinds of things. Okay? And boys and girls were in each experimental condition. Before doing that, he tested for natural aggressiveness, physical, verbal, how they played with certain objects anyway. And what he tried to do is he tried to spread them out. So kids that were aggressive, kids that weren't aggressive, he tried to put them in the different groups. Okay? And I want you to be able to think to yourself, what type of research design is this? I'm going to talk about this in class. Basically, the findings were this. And this is the thing with Bandura's Bobo doll experiments. Basically, what you think would happen, happened. Okay, so what you think would happen, happened. So children who saw the aggressive model perform more aggressive acts, they perform more aggressive acts. Okay? Children who saw them play calmly with the doll, they played relatively calmly. Okay? And kids that didn't have any model, it was a mixture of results, but they weren't nearly as aggressive as the children who saw an aggressive model. Okay? Overall, something very interesting he found is that boys were more aggressive than girls in general. Okay? Boys imitated aggression more from male models, and girls imitated physical aggression more from male models, but verbal aggression more from female models. Okay? So if they saw the female model talking badly or even swearing at the model, then they were more likely to do that. Okay? So that's really important. You need to know the results of study 1. His conclusion was that aggressive behavior can be learnt through exposure to aggressive models. Okay? He also was able to conclude that there are sex differences in aggressive behavior, so boys are more aggressive than girls. Okay? One other thing that he talked about was that behavior learned through observation may not be demonstrated unless there is an opportunity presented. So that kind of goes back to that earlier video that I showed you, is that kids are always learning. They may not be aggressive all the time, but if they're given a similar opportunity, they're more likely to act the way that the model acted. Okay, even though they don't act like that all the time. Finally, he talked about how children had sex role expectations about males and female aggression. So basically, young kids expected males to be angrier and women to be more passive. Okay, so test number 2, or Bandura's experiment number 2, a couple of years later, 1963A. Okay, he did 2 in 1963. This was, again, the idea of, are the kids watching on television learning bad habits? So, he came up with a different set of conditions. Okay, so his idea was, does observation of aggressive models in films by real life and cartoon characters influence aggressive behavior in children? Okay, so number 2 was the idea that if they observe aggressive models in films by real life and cartoon characters, this could influence aggressive behavior in children. They assumed, again, even just watching cartoons and watching real life people but on film, boys would be more aggressive because that's what they learned last time. And they weren't sure which way they'd go, really, on whether or not they'd be more aggressive if they watched a model on TV or if they watched a model in real life or what. So his experimental conditions were this. They had a control group of kids, again, where there was no model shown. They had 3 experimental conditions. Okay, again, school-aged, like preschool-aged children. The idea was this. There was a real-life aggressive model, similar to study 1. Okay, so they got to see a real-life aggressive model acting aggressively. Then they also had a real-life aggressive model, but on film. So the kids watched a film of a model being aggressive. And thirdly, they watched an aggressive cartoon character. All right, then they sent the kids into play. What did they find? Well, but what they found was this. Boys were more aggressive overall. Tick, that's to be expected. Okay? Boys imitated most aggression when observing real-life models. That's really important from number 2. The real-life models had a much bigger impact than the films or than the cartoons. Okay? Again, girls imitated most aggression when watching the real-life models on film. So, what does that tell us? Well, that was a big deal. A lot of people had said TV is evil, TV is bad, kids will learn bad habits from TV. This caused a lot of people to realise that they had to look closer to home. Kids were more likely to learn bad behaviour or good behaviour from the people around them. Their parents, their aunties, their uncles, their brothers, their sisters had a much bigger impact than anything that they saw on television. Okay, so their conclusion was exposure to aggressive models increased the probability that children will behave aggressively. You can learn aggressive behaviour through both real life and a film portrayed model. Okay, but again, not nearly as strong. It's important to note though that the children that had no model and then the children that saw the model of the cartoon, there was still almost twice as much aggressive behaviour. Later on that year, they did another experiment. Bandura's Bobo doll study number 3. This time what is he looking at? He's looking at rewards and punishments. Okay, vicarious and real. So he set up some different conditions. Do rewards and punishment influence observational learning is the question. The theory was it more likely to imitate behavior of a rewarded model than a punished model. Okay, so 4 conditions, 2 experimental. So the experimental group was kids watched an aggressive model, real life aggressive model, who was rewarded with praise and a food treat if they did something aggressive. And then also they watched an aggressive model who was punished with a verbal telling off and a spanking if they did something wrong. Okay, so you've got experimental condition number 1, they see someone being aggressive and they see that person getting rewarded. Number 2, they see someone being aggressive and they see that person getting punished. They also, in the control group, had a non-aggressive model who received no consequences to see what they would do, and also no model at all. Alright, what were the findings? If they watched the model be aggressive and then be rewarded, then the kids that saw that were very aggressive in their play. Okay? What's interesting to note is that from then on, there wasn't really a big difference. So whether there was no model, whether they saw a passive model, or, more importantly, if they saw an aggressive model who was punished, then they didn't play aggressively. Okay, there was very, 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 very little difference there. Again, as usual, boys are more aggressive than girls. The conclusion there, observational learning does involve conditioning processes. Okay, children are more likely to imitate behavior that they observe being reinforced than behavior they observe being punished. This shows that operant conditioning is stronger than observational learning. Okay, think about it. Think about perhaps if you were to see an older brother or family member do something and then their friends gave them a high fives or something like that, then you're more likely to engage in that behavior, okay, because of the power of operant conditioning, so the rewards. So in a nutshell, that's observational learning. You need to remember there are key elements, ARMR, A-R-R-M-R, and you can see them there: attention, retention, reproduction, motivation, and reinforcement. You need to know Bandura's Bobo doll experiments. There are 3 different experiments. You need to know them. You need to know what they were looking for. You need to know how they did it. And more importantly, you need to know what they found. Boys are more aggressive than girls. Okay? You need to remember that if the model they were watching was aggressive, they were more likely to be aggressive. Simple fact. If they watch their model be kind of nice and play with the Bobo doll nicely, then they behave nicely. Okay? Seeing someone in real life as a model and trying to follow their behavior is a lot stronger than watching it on television. Okay? And a lot stronger again than watching a cartoon version of it. All right? That's very, very important. Okay? That's basically it. There's going to be some questions on this in class, so make sure you understand the Bobo doll, and I will see you in class. Thanks.